So this is basically a blending practice session, using my trusty Hellcat here. And I've got some Incubi Darkness and Thunderhawk Blue in the palette, thinned about 1:1 with water. Now I've already painted the Incubi Darkness down on there, but some of the blending practice that I do is I take like this fairly thin Thunderhawk Blue, and let's say I want to start a blend about from here. Just start painting that in, and you can see how thin that is. And what I'm doing is I'm doing this to not show you necessarily how to blend, because I'm not good at it, but to show you how much I struggle with it. But by practicing, I'm hoping I can overcome that. I just put that on and you see it starts drying fairly quickly. And what I tend to do is I hit it with my hair dryer real quick, so I can speed up my work time. And then I start doing the same thing again. And I'm working off paint on this piece of paper towel because I only want a little on the brush. But I start a little further back. Now what I've found is that, you see I got too much paint on the brush there. I should have unloaded more. Now what I do in that case when I realize I've flubbed it like that is I just take some paint off my brush and I pull it back so that it builds up the color. It actually ends up doing what I wanted to do in the first place, which is build up color more towards the back of the area. Now this, I like this technique, one, because I can kind of make it work. Not real well. Keep in mind, I'm learning all of this as I go. But doing this between similar colors is a little easier than it is, say, if I were trying to blend maybe something like this Tau Light Ochre into it. That's where I get myself in trouble, is when I try and blend very dissimilar colors. I have a hard time with that. Now, I'm cleaning my brush off as I talk. That's why the brush disappears. But I do this, I'm actually doing this for the sake of the camera a little quicker than I normally would. If I'm doing this on a larger surface, I would probably thin my paint a little more and do quite a few more layers. But this works fairly well. You can see it gives a decent blend between, where the gradient starts and where it ends up. And I could go in with, say, the next color I'd probably want to go in with is Fenrisian Gray, and thin that down, and I could start, say, here and start really bringing it back. I could have started with Dark Reaper, so that I would have a series of colors, like from Incubi Darkness to Dark Reaper to Thunderhawk Blue to Fenrisian Gray. And that can make it easier, although when you're still struggling with it like I am, sometimes introducing more colors actually has made it harder for me, because I find that it just adds more complicated steps. But again, I think it's lack of skill that makes it difficult for me, rather than that it's not a valid way of doing it. Now, one of the things that I've known this, but I've never really played with it much, is the idea of reversing all of this. Because you see, here, let me turn off the autofocus, or the focus lock, rather. You see that, come on, focus guy. You see that right up there, that transition is really rough. And if you're wanting nice smooth transition. Sometimes that can be a problem. And so what I'm starting to experiment more with is thinning down. Let me put just a little paint over here. Put a little more water in my palette. I should probably be using a wet palette. Part of the reason I don't use a wet palette is I get so little time during the day to paint anymore. I can never work more than about an hour at a time, and I only get 2 or 3 hours a day to work on my painting. So I have very limited time anymore when it comes to painting. But I've thinned that down. It was already thin 1:1. Now it's probably 2:1. But what I do is I just start back here. I don't go deep into it, but I just start glazing that original Incubi Darkness like that. And I just kind of work to maybe soften that transition a little bit. And then I just work back and forth between the two colors like that. And right now I'm pretty much making a hash of it because I'm hurrying it. And that's maybe a little, I don't know that I would fully call that wet blending. Wet blending is really hard for me. But you can see in that, you know, you can soften that transition a little bit. I'm never sure if I like having it be an exact line between the two colors, or if I'm okay with a little bit of scratchiness. I guess a lot of it depends on the angle. You know, if you're doing something that's, whoops, if you're doing something like this guy's shoulder, then, you know, it's a round thing. And you can see I've already started doing some of that. It's a round thing. And you can kind of work your way onto it like that. But this is one of the things I practice now. I've started becoming more interested in, I've seen people do what they call stipple blending, where instead of, you know, you pick a point. I'll just pick a point here, and I just start stippling in some color like that, and just kind of working my way back. And then as I stipple in more, I put more dots. I mean, because that's really what you're doing here, is you're just putting in lots and lots and lots of dots. And I've seen some folks get some really incredible results using this, and they just build that color up. I like this because it gives me a little bit more control over placement. What I don't like about it is it takes forever. But I think it's very easy to go back and forth between, you know, adding more color, adding less color, that kind of thing. And I just keep working on it. What I like about this stipple blending, another thing that I like about this stipple blending versus this glaze blending kind of thing, is that, and here I'm going to just kind of go back into it and stipple blend, you know, back into that transition and just keep working it back and forth until I get something I like. Can even do the attempt at wet blending right there on the transition. See how that comes out. But what I like about this is because it's stippling, you can use a really small brush to get into smaller areas. This one, you know, when I've done this on like leather seats or something, it works really well because you've got, you know, some distance, you know, from here to here, you've got some distance that you can do that. But when you're doing it on something this sized, you don't have a lot of distance to do multiple multiple passes. And so I like this stipple blending because it gives me the opportunity to just put in, literally single rows of tiny dots. As with everything like this, I have to get it right up to my face to see what I'm doing. But just gets in single rows of tiny dots. And I'm liking this. I've been using this more and more on this Operative Umbral 6 figure. And I like it a lot better than this method for something like that. And I've realized that it takes a lot more practice than I had given it credit for. Let me say it that way. I had thought, and this is kind of dumb of me, because I've talked about this like with airbrushing. People will come in airbrushing and they go, okay, I know how to do other things, so if I come in airbrushing, I should pick up on this fairly quick. I thought I understood a lot of this a lot more. And so I would look at, this and go, well, I should be able to pick up on this, because it's not that, I'm certainly not saying it's not that hard, but if you've already got skills in doing one thing and then you're going into something that's similar, you'd think it would kind of, help apply. And here I'm going to do a quick blend of the two colors like this. It's another thing that I do is just sometimes I'll just do a quick blend of the two colors and then hit that into that transition area just to try and work that gradient like that. But I thought, okay, what I've done in the past is going to apply to the point that I can pick this up fairly quick. And I have discovered that I was wrong. I was quite arrogant about that. Quite prideful. and it has impacted my ability to get this done, because I've realized I've got to step back and just practice as if I know nothing, and just do this kind of thing over and over and over again, and start to see, how does it work? What are the limits? How do I make different colors work? Because when you see some of the work that a lot of these painters that we see on Instagram and YouTube and stuff like that do, it's just incredible. So I know this probably hasn't been a real helpful video, because what I basically showed you is how not to blend, I think. But I hope it just shows kind of the process of the things that I'm practicing, and the things that I watch. I watch how people do these things, and I try to add that into my mix of how I do it, and I try to get it to work. I don't always succeed, but I mean, that's the whole process of learning. Now, quick note about the stipple blending versus the glazing. I have found on some areas that I like doing, like I'll glaze, I'll start a glaze blend, just a fairly stark one like that, and just have a really stark line right there. And then that's where I'll actually come in with the other color. And I'm not going to let it dry just for the sake of demonstration, but I'll actually come in with the other color afterwards and begin walking a stipple blend back into it to try and soften that transition. And so it's like you paint a fairly opaque color here and a fairly opaque color here, and then you just work in the middle on the transition like that. And it's kind of a cheaper way that I can get it done. It's sort of wet blending, but it's like, for me, it's wet blending for dummies. Because again, wet blending is like something I just totally struggle with. So anyway, if you're working on blends, Here's some things to try. You can use any colors. What has been, I won't say I recommend, what has been more helpful for me is to start with colors that are maybe 2 steps apart. I mean, you know, these are 3 colors work together. I pull that one out and I work kind of to see how smooth can I get it between those two. And another thing I haven't shown, but I do sometimes, is actually later go in with a shade or something like that over it to blend it together even more. But it's just some of the stuff I work on, both on this practice model and on miniatures and parts, and I've even done it on pieces of sprue. If you've primed something up and you primed it on the sprue, you get chunks of practice plastic. So there's lots of ways to get practice in.